In a small town, nestled among forests and mountains, rumors began to circulate about strange disappearances. The initial rumors spoke of something that emerged from the darkest depths of the night. Soon, the entire town was abuzz with talk of a terrifying figure that, like a ghost, slowly wandered the streets and alleys at night. Those who claimed to have seen it described a monstrous vision, a tall silhouette concealed beneath a cloak of the deepest shades, and sinister, flickering eyes that seemed to read every soul. The rumors and descriptions quickly spread among the townspeople, and fear intensified with each new story. Before long, it took on a truly mythic quality, and the townsfolk began to believe they were dealing with something far more sinister than an ordinary criminal. Only a few weeks had passed since the first whispers of the mysterious maniac, and the town had already witnessed a series of perplexing disappearances. People were vanishing without a trace, as though melting into the night, leaving their families in agonizing uncertainty. Families and loved ones suffered from the absence of their children, relatives, and friends. Anxiety and despair gripped everyone who had lost someone dear. The town became a place where fear and sorrow were constant companions. The nights became sleepless for those who remained. With each person who vanished, the fear grew that they might be next. People spent hours sitting by their windows, listening to every sound, fearing that the maniac would come to their homes. The streets of the town at night became empty and eerie. People avoided going out after dark, and even during the day, they looked around as if expecting the maniac to be lurking anywhere. Families turned to the police, hoping they could locate the missing individuals, but investigations yielded no results. There were no officially declared suspects, and this only heightened the fear and unease among the townspeople. The police commenced their investigation but could find nothing except the traces of horrifying murders and disappearances. Even seasoned detectives were powerless against this inhuman evil. No one knew anything about the identity of the maniac. His identity remained completely enigmatic, and his methods were terrifying. The only thing the townspeople knew was that this killer would not stop, and would show no mercy. The maniac was known only by his faceless name, which provided no identification whatsoever. It was a name that simply pierced the hearts of the residents but gave them no information about his identity. He blended in with the ordinary crowd, concealing his true nature. His ability to camouflage himself and remain unnoticed made him even more horrifying, as no one could discern who among them harbored the evil. Townspeople began to suspect the worst. The maniac could be anyone, a neighbor, a colleague, even a member of their own families. This uncertainty only heightened their fear and paranoia. The maniac left messages at the murder scenes, but they were cryptic and filled with symbolism that no one could decipher. These messages not only terrified but also left the townspeople guessing about his motives and objectives. With each passing day, the town plunged deeper into darkness and fear. The residents felt trapped, and even their own homes lost their familiar comfort, becoming places where they hid from the terror. Under the drip of raindrops, the city seemed even more menacing. The maniac continued his relentless campaign through it, and he appeared invisible, like a monster lurking in the darkest corners of this American dream. Since the appearance of the killer maniac in the city, terror knew no respite. He killed and abducted as if he knew no fatigue. The visibility of his actions only exacerbated the panic. People began barricading their doors and windows, hoping that it would somehow help protect them from the inhuman predator. But in vain. The maniac infiltrated homes like a ghost, leaving only the horrifying traces of his deeds. Since the appearance of the maniac in the city, the police had been exerting tremendous efforts to solve the mysterious murders and disappearances, but every step proved futile. The police faced a horrifying enigma. There were no clues or traces left at the murder scenes that could lead to the maniac. Even the most experienced investigators were powerless in the absence of concrete evidence. Officers interviewed witnesses and relatives of the victims, but many of them were in a state of shock and couldn't provide useful information. Police had to sift through hundreds of interviews, hoping to find some keywords or indicators. With each new murder and disappearance, society pressured the police. The townspeople were frightened and disappointed that the police couldn't protect them from this nightmare. Protests and demands for enhanced security measures became increasingly fervent. The police detained several individuals they deemed suspicious, but all these arrests turned out to be mistaken. The release of the innocent only intensified societal unrest and dissatisfaction. Local and national media elevated this case to a public interest issue, adding extra pressure on the police. Journalists demanded answers and explanations, but the police were constrained by the lack of specific information. Within the police force, discontent and disagreements began to surface. Some officers believed that the investigation was too complex and drawn out, while others insisted on continuing their efforts. This led to tense relationships and even conflicts among the personnel. The city became a place of nightmares. The sounds of the night were filled with cries and moans, and the streets were empty, as if the remaining residents were hiding from the nightmare. The townspeople felt that the city was occupied by forces of evil. With each new murder and disappearance, the townspeople were confronted with a growing sense of horror and insecurity, leading to a series of relocations and abandoned homes. Many houses began to stand vacant, as their owners, fearing for their own safety and the safety of their families, were forced to leave. They left behind only empty hallways and somber windows, reflecting the state of the townspeople's souls. The streets, once filled with laughter and joy, became lifeless and grim. People avoided going out after sunset, and their homes turned into desolate bunkers. Many townspeople opted for mass relocations, leaving their homes and their lives behind in this place. Families with children fled in search of safety and peace, even if it meant losing their homes and possessions. Neighborhoods that once had vibrant life and the echoing laughter of children turned into gloomy and abandoned places. Windows and doors were boarded up, as if symbols of powerlessness and fear. The maniac managed to remain elusive. He knew every street, every hidden corner, and his victims had neither a chance nor hope. Law enforcement simply couldn't contend with such a predator. As fear and anxiety intensified, townspeople began to form self-defense groups to protect themselves and their loved ones from the maniac. People who were once strangers now became allies in the fight for their lives and safety. Their common goal was to stop the maniac and provide protection for their families. Self-defense groups organized nighttime patrols throughout the city. They closely monitored suspicious activities and tried to prevent potential attacks by the maniac. These groups developed alert and communication systems to warn each other of potential threats. Radios and mobile applications became incredibly important tools for coordination. The maniac continued to lurk in the shadows, observing the actions of the townspeople and self-defense groups. He knew they were becoming more vigilant and decided to exploit their trust in his fictitious cooperation. Townspeople discovered strange notes on their doors and windows, claiming that the maniac was willing to collaborate with the self-defense groups. These notes created a false sense of security. Some townspeople began receiving threatening phone calls and eerie whispers. These calls made them feel like the maniac was monitoring their every move. Over time, residents started noticing unexplained encounters and shadowy figures in dark corners. These moments of terror underscored the fact that the maniac was always closer than it seemed and could appear at any moment. The maniac's actions began to erode the townspeople's trust in each other and the members of the self-defense groups. They started suspecting everyone, not knowing who might be hiding evil within. Hope began to fade like the last glimmer of light in this darkness. The city was no longer the place it once was. The townspeople realized that they needed to take action before the horror consumed everyone. Jake and Michael, witnessing the destruction of their friends and family's city, decided to stand in the way of the maniac. Their determination was unwavering. They couldn't leave the city without a fight. Realizing that the police were powerless and the city needed their help, they decided to launch their own investigation to find the maniac. They began by gathering all available data on the previous murders and disappearances. They reviewed records, collected witness testimonies, and analyzed the messages left by the maniac at the crime scenes. Jake and Michael started by gathering all available data on the previous murders and disappearances. They reviewed records, collected witness testimonies, and analyzed the messages left by the maniac at the crime scenes. They also began to talk to the townspeople, especially those who survived the maniac's attacks. They hoped to gather valuable clues and descriptions of the maniac's personality. They conducted detailed analysis of the messages left by the maniac at the crime scenes, attempting to decode the symbolism and find hidden hints that could lead them to his identity. Jake and Michael pay attention to rumors about secret structures and organizations in the city that might have a connection to the maniac. They start investigating these dark circles in search of answers. As the heroes delve deeper into the investigation, they encounter danger and put themselves at risk. Their search may lead them to places where the maniac could be closer than they expected. After initiating their own investigation, they decide to focus on surveillance cameras installed in various parts of the city. This could provide them with valuable information about the maniac's movements and possible locations. They begin to contact the owners of stores, restaurants, and other establishments with surveillance cameras. They gain access to recordings from the past few months and carefully analyze each video. They watch every video of events that occurred at the locations of the murders and disappearances. They look for unusual or suspicious behavior in people on the recordings and try to identify any commonalities related to the crimes. Diving deep into the analysis, slowing down the video clips, and enhancing the resolution to see details better, they scrutinize every movement and every figure, trying to find patterns in the maniac's actions. Over time, the friends start identifying specific patterns in the maniac's movements. They notice that certain areas of the city become more frequent targets of attacks and attempt to uncover what connects these locations. Based on the analysis of surveillance camera footage, Jake and Michael reach out to witnesses present at the crime scenes. They hope to corroborate their observations and gather additional information about the maniac. Not standing idle, Jake and Michael question witnesses of the horrifying events. They hope for a thread that could lead them to a breakthrough. The first step in searching for patterns is analyzing all known victims of the maniac. The friends study their profiles, paying attention to age, gender, profession, and place of residence. They also examine the time intervals between the murders and disappearances. The friends hope to identify regularity or peculiarities in this schedule that could help them predict the next attack. The friends investigate the maniac's interaction with the community, including the messages he left behind and his attempts to contact the townspeople. They try to understand the motives and goals that may be concealed behind these actions. They also pay attention to the results of previous investigations and the police's attempts to identify patterns in the maniac's activities. They hope to find any overlooked details or revisions that could assist in their own investigation. Based on all the gathered data, the friends attempt to create a more detailed profile of the maniac. They hope this will help them predict his next actions and unveil his identity before he commits another crime. Jake and Michael spend nights in ambush, waiting for the maniac to potentially return to previously visited places. They were prepared for any challenges in tracking down the maniac. They decide to employ a strategy of traps to try to catch the maniac. They hope that creating artificial situations will capture his attention and force him to surface. They select several locations that appear potentially attractive to the maniac and simulate them to create the illusion of potential victims and vulnerability. They monitor the traps using cameras and listening devices, waiting for the moment when the maniac appears. Their goal is to capture him on video and gather as much information as possible. Jake and Michael understand that trap attempts can be dangerous, and they remain vigilant and attentive. They collaborate with the local police to ensure the safety of both the potential victims and themselves. The maniac remained elusive and unpredictable. All their efforts were in vain, and the city remained in the grip of fear and madness. Jake and Michael uncover some details that link different crimes, and they realize that the maniac indeed committed them all. This puts their safety and the safety of the townspeople in doubt. During further analysis, they discover hidden clues that lead them to a specific location where the maniac may be hiding. This gives them hope that they are getting closer to capturing him. The maniac continues to leave cryptic messages, but now they become more personal and threatening. It creates a sense that he knows he's being hunted and is not going down without a fight. Nightmares begin to torment them, and their dreams are filled with horror and ominous visions of the maniac. They realize that the maniac has become a part of their own nightmares. The heroes were willing to do whatever it took to track down the maniac and stop him. The hope of saving the city rested on their shoulders, and they were prepared to go to the end, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. Michael disappeared without a trace, leaving Jake alone. Jake understood that he needed to continue his investigation with double determination, despite the loss of his friend. One day, while Jake and Michael were spending the night exploring potentially dangerous areas of the city, Michael suddenly vanished. An untouched surveillance camera recorded Michael entering the inner courtyard of an abandoned house, and then his figure disappeared into the darkness. Jake rushed to the house, but Michael was nowhere to be found. Initially, Jake focuses on finding his missing friend, Michael. He analyzes the surveillance camera footage and tries to decipher the maniac's message to figure out where and why Michael disappeared. Jake conducts a thorough examination of the place where Michael disappeared, searching for any traces or clues. He pays attention to every detail and tries to figure out how Michael could have entered the abandoned house. Jake contacts the police and provides them with all available information about Michael and the circumstances of his disappearance. However, even the efforts of the police do not lead to concrete results, and they continue to investigate the case. Jake reaches out to the townspeople and asks for their help in finding Michael. He posts flyers and shares information about his disappearance, hoping that someone from the townspeople may have seen something that will help unravel the mystery. Despite all efforts, the search for Michael remains unsuccessful. Jake realizes that he needs to continue investigating the maniac in order to uncover the truth and possibly find his friend. Jake finds a handwritten letter in his mailbox. The letter is filled with threats and hints that Michael is in danger and that the maniac is always one step ahead. The letter contains strange symbols and cryptic messages that Jake attempts to decipher. The maniac creates the feeling that he is playing a cat and mouse game with him. It fills Jake with a new level of fear and concern. He understands that the maniac is watching him and intends to continue. The police were on the brink of despair, and the city was engulfed in panic. Not only had the maniac taken their friend, but the silence of the night had swallowed him as well. The hope of his rescue diminished with each passing minute. After another message from the maniac, Jake feels a heaviness in his chest, realizing that time is running out, and his investigation is teetering on the edge of collapse. Jake spends many sleepless nights trying to decipher the riddles and instructions given by the maniac in the message. He feels crushed and exhausted. Friends who once fought together are now separated, and Jake is left alone. He carries the burden of responsibility for finding Michael and uncovering the maniac's mystery. Michael's family lives in constant anxiety and uncertainty. Jake sees their broken hearts and understands that he is obligated to find Michael for their sake. They knew it was their last chance to save the city, but without their friend, they had to move forward in darkness. Fear and helplessness made each step increasingly difficult. The police, demoralized by the incident, couldn't find any evidence, witnesses, or traces of their friend. The horror grew even deeper, and the city descended into pitiful hopelessness. Life in the city became even darker, as if a shadow of endless nightmare had descended upon it. The city would never see the light again because the serial killer had engulfed them all in eternal darkness. The city remained locked in a grim reality, and Jake realized that he had lost not only a friend but also the last shreds of hope for salvation. The serial killer had won, and the city was mired in endless darkness. After Jake realizes that he needs additional knowledge to banish the serial killer, he actively begins to search for ancient records and texts related to dark magic and exorcising evil spirits. He delves into libraries and consults experts in occult sciences to find the necessary instructions. Jake performs a series of rituals aimed at strengthening his protection. He creates amulets and talismans that will help him ward off the attacks of the serial killer. Each amulet is charged with magical energy and has its own special function. He studies ancient magical spells and prayers that will help him strengthen his willpower and focus during the ritual. He repeats them daily, entering a state of deep meditation. He begins physical training, strengthening his body to be in good shape during the confrontation and developing his abilities. He studies artifacts and items that will assist him in the ritual. For the exorcism ritual, Jake gathers rare ingredients and relics. He travels to remote places to find what he needs. These ingredients possess magical power and will be used in the ritual itself. Knowing that he must be pure before the ritual, Jake undergoes a series of purification rites for his soul and body. He takes baths with aromatic oils, burns incense, and follows a special daily regimen. He also prepares himself for the psychological challenges that come with confronting the serial killer. He engages in meditation and visualization to strengthen his spiritual resilience. All these preparatory steps not only bring physical strength to Jake, but also instill self-confidence as he faces the expulsion of the monster. Jake chooses an abandoned and enigmatic house deep in the forest as the location for the exorcism ritual. This house serves as a crucial point in his plan, as he believes it is capable of amplifying his ritual. The time for the ritual has come. On the night when the stars are in a specific alignment, Jake arrives at the abandoned house, where he begins his exorcism ritual. Jake starts creating a magical circle around himself to protect against the serial killer and keep him under control. He uses amulets and talismans he prepared in advance to reinforce this circle. As Jake begins reciting incantations and prayers to initiate the exorcism ritual, he feels the power of the serial killer attempting to breach his defenses. The killer starts breaking the barriers Jake has created, putting his ritual in jeopardy. Jake is forced to adapt his plan quickly. He changes the sequence of actions and begins using ingredients that were not initially planned. His ability to make rapid decisions becomes key to his success. During the ritual, Jake and the serial killer battle on the level of consciousness. The killer tries to influence his thoughts and feelings, but Jake uses his willpower to remain steadfast. Everything around them begins to tremble, and the world merges into one. With the final words of the ritual, Jake feels the serial killer departing from him. He sees the dark shadows disappearing, and the world around him starts to cleanse itself. He has achieved his goal, but realizes that the price for it may be high. Jake breathes heavily. His body trembles from exhaustion. He can barely stand, and realizes that he paid a tremendous price for expelling the serial killer. He understands that this is his farewell moment. His sacrifice brings freedom to the city, but leaves him powerless and depleted. He realizes that the recovery after the ritual will be lengthy, and may even be impossible. His strength and willpower are fading, and he knows that his ultimate fate awaits him. With the last of his strength, he leaves the abandoned house and returns to the city he had worked so hard to save. His friends and the city's residents greet him with joy, but soon they realize that Jake is no longer the person he once was. His sacrifice brings them freedom from the serial killer, but it leaves them with a bitter sense of loss. Jake departs from this world. His life fades away, but his heroic deed will remain in the memory of those he saved. The city will be free, but its residents will bear the heavy legacy of fear and loss. The city begins to recover, but its residents soon realize that Jake is no longer among them. His sacrifice brings them freedom from the serial killer, but leaves a bitter sense of loss. Several months after Jake's disappearance, the city begins to feel the presence of the serial killer once again. At first, it seems unbelievable, but horrifying events start to repeat themselves. The initial signs of the killer's return do not cause panic. They are subtle hints that only stir up unease among the residents. House walls become covered in bloody messages, and whispers and laughter are heard among the trees at night. Soon after, gruesome murders begin to occur, reminiscent of the killer's methods. Victims' bodies are found in abandoned houses and in the woods. The city descends into panic, and fear once again grips its residents. Anxiety and terror overwhelm the inhabitants. The city appeared to have freed itself from the serial killer, but his return creates an unbearable sense of dread. The city's residents realize that without Jake, they are defenseless against the serial killer. The city plunges back into darkness and horror, and no one knows how this nightmare will end. The cycle repeats, and the residents understand that Jake is no longer there to protect them.